Hello, and welcome to Mythos and Logos. Here is a paradox that shaped the destiny of Europe. The barbarians who brought down Rome would become more Roman than the Romans themselves. They were the Franks, a loose confederation of Germanic tribes who emerged from the misty marshlands beyond the Rhine, speaking a harsh tongue and worshipping gods of thunder and war. These were people whom Roman writers dismissed as savage and uncivilized, yet within 3 centuries, their kings would claim the imperial purple, and their scholars would preserve Latin learning when Rome itself had forgotten how to read. The very word France carries their name, as does the title of every Holy Roman Emperor who ever lived. From crude wooden halls along the Rhine to the marble throne of Charlemagne, from pagan warbands to the defenders of Christendom, the Franks transformed not just themselves, but the entire conception of what Europe could become. Tonight, we will trace this remarkable metamorphosis from tribal confederation to continental empire. We will walk the muddy paths of their earliest settlements, stand in the basilica where Clovis accepted baptism and changed history, and witness the coronation that resurrected the Western Empire on Christmas Day, 800 AD. Our journey will reveal how a people without writing created the script we still use today, how warriors who fought naked birthed the culture of chivalry, and how the descendants of raiders became the architects of medieval civilization. A quick request before we start: if you're enjoying the content, please consider liking and subscribing. It's the best way to help me continue creating these videos for you. I love connecting with viewers worldwide. So, drop a comment sharing your location and local time. Close your eyes and let your breathing deepen as we drift together into the 3rd century AD, to the vast wetlands that stretch along the lower Rhine. You can smell the bog myrtle and decaying vegetation, hear the cries of marsh birds, and the distant sound of hammers on anvils, where smiths forge the iron that will one day conquer Gaul. The Roman watchtowers stand like lonely sentinels on the far bank, their torches reflected in the dark water, marking the edge of the civilized world. Beyond them, in the lands the Romans called Germania Inferior, the first Frankish warbands are gathering, unaware that their descendants will one day rule from the Atlantic to the Danube, from the North Sea to the gates of Rome itself. Part 1. Origins and Ethnogenesis. The people of the marsh. The Franks did not burst into history with trumpets and proclamations. They seeped into it, like water through river mud, in the decades around 250 AD, when Roman chroniclers first began to notice that something had changed along the lower Rhine. Where once there had been a patchwork of separate tribes, with names like the Chamavi, Bructeri, and Sali, now there was something new, a confederation that called themselves the Franchi, the fierce ones, or perhaps the free ones, for even the origin of their name remains disputed in the shadows of their emergence. The wetlands of the Rhine Delta shaped them as surely as any parent shapes a child. This was a landscape of endless waterways, of islands that appeared and vanished with the seasons, of treacherous bogs that could swallow a man whole. The Romans, with their love of straight roads and ordered camps, viewed these marshes as the very definition of barbarism. Yet for the Franks, this watery maze was both fortress and nursery. Here, in villages built on artificial mounds, called turpen, rising like islands above the floodplains, they developed the skills that would serve them for centuries to come: the ability to move swiftly through difficult terrain, to strike and vanish, to adapt to changing circumstances with the fluid flexibility of the very waters that surrounded them. You are standing on one of these turpen as dawn breaks over the marshes in 260 AD. The morning mist rises from the water in ghostly columns, and you can taste the salt carried inland from the North Sea. Your feet sink slightly into the packed earth and dung that forms the mound beneath your family's longhouse. Around you, the village is already stirring. Women tend fires that never fully die, their smoke mixing with the mist. Men check weapons that must always be ready. Children chase chickens between the wooden posts that support the houses. You know every sound of this place: the creak of the wooden walkways that connect building to building, the splash of fishing nets being cast, the rhythmic scrape of whetstones on iron. This morning feels different though. Word has come that Roman merchants will arrive today, bringing wine and glassware to trade for furs and slaves. Some of your neighbours mutter that the empire grows weak, that its soldiers no longer patrol as they once did. Your grandfather remembers when the legions were invincible. You wonder if your children will remember them at all. Archaeological evidence from sites like Weister and Feddesen-Weerde reveals the material culture of these early Franks. Simple pottery without the potter's wheel, rectangular timber longhouses shared with livestock, weapons that show a distinctive blend of Germanic and Roman influences. They were not isolated primitives but active participants in the frontier economy. Frankish warriors served as auxiliaries in Roman armies, learning the discipline and tactics they would later use against their teachers. Frankish traders penetrated deep into both Germania and the empire, creating networks that would become the arteries of medieval commerce. The transformation from separate tribes to unified confederation happened gradually, likely driven by the need to negotiate with Rome from a position of greater strength. The Romans preferred to deal with larger political units, offering subsidies and trading privileges to keep the peace. By choosing to present themselves as Franks rather than Chamavi or Bructeri, these tribes gained leverage and identity. It was a calculated evolution, not a sudden revolution, and it established a pattern the Franks would follow throughout their history. The absorption and transformation of useful elements from other cultures while maintaining their essential character. The language of iron and oak. Before they had writing, the Franks had iron. Their smiths were artists of destruction, crafting the Francisca, the throwing axe that would become their signature weapon and give its name to their nation. In clearing after clearing throughout the forests east of the Rhine, the ring of hammer on anvil announced their presence more surely than any banner. These weapons were not crude instruments but sophisticated tools, balanced for throwing, decorated with intricate patterns that spoke of both beauty and death. When archaeologists uncover Frankish graves today, they find these axes placed carefully beside their owners, ready for whatever battles awaited in the afterlife. The Frankish language itself was a weapon of sorts, a harsh Germanic dialect that Roman ears found barbarous, but which contained subtle distinctions unknown to Latin. They had dozens of words for different types of warfare, for kinship relations that determined inheritance and vengeance, for the various qualities of soil and water that meant survival or starvation. This was an oral culture, where memory was sacred and genealogies were recited like prayers. The eldest members of each clan carried libraries in their minds, legal codes, heroic songs, the names of ancestors stretching back into the mists of time. Their social structure reflected the harsh realities of frontier life. At its heart was the clan, bound by blood and oath in a web of mutual obligations that no individual could escape. Above the clans were the war leaders, chosen for their success in battle and their ability to provide plunder and protection. These were not hereditary kings in the later medieval sense, but something more like elected generals, their authority lasting only as long as their luck held. A failed raid, a lost battle, a poor harvest, and another would take their place. This competitive system produced leaders of remarkable ability, men who had proven themselves in the most direct way possible. The freeman farmer formed the backbone of Frankish society, owning his land and weapons, owing service to his war leader, but maintaining his essential independence. Below him were the half-free, bound to the land but not quite slaves, and below them the slaves themselves, often war captives or debtors. Yet even this rigid hierarchy contained surprising flexibility. A slave who fought well might earn freedom. A freeman who showed cowardice might lose it. The Franks valued deed over birth, achievement over ancestry, at least in these early centuries before success made them comfortable and hierarchy became rigid. Roman observers, particularly the historian Ammianus Marcellinus, noted the Franks' peculiar combination of savage ferocity and surprising sophistication. They were capable of berserker rage in battle, throwing themselves at enemy lines with complete disregard for their own safety. Yet they were also skilled negotiators, understanding the value of treaties and alliances playing different Roman factions against each other with diplomatic subtlety. They absorbed Roman military techniques while maintaining their own tactical advantages. They adopted Roman titles while keeping their own power structures. This dual nature, barbarian and civilized, would characterize them throughout their rise to dominance. As the 3rd century waned and the 4th began, the Franks stood at a crossroads. The old tribal ways were giving way to new forms of organization. Contact with Rome was transforming their society in ways both obvious and subtle. Young Frankish nobles served in Roman armies, returning home with new ideas about governance and warfare. Roman gold flowed into Frankish lands, creating new wealthy elites who could afford better weapons, larger warbands, and greater ambitions. The stage was set for the emergence of the first great Frankish leaders who would transform their people from confederated tribes into a force that would reshape the European continent. Part 2. Geographic spread and homeland. Between two worlds, the Rhine frontier. The Rhine was more than a river. It was a liquid boundary between worlds. On its western bank stood the ordered universe of Rome. Stone fortifications at regular intervals, paved roads running straight as spear shafts, towns laid out in predictable grids. On the eastern bank sprawled the forests and marshlands of Germania, where paths twisted between ancient oaks and settlements appeared and vanished with the seasons. The Franks lived in both worlds and belonged fully to neither, creating something entirely new in the spaces between. By the year 300 AD, the Frankish homeland stretched along the lower Rhine from its delta near the North Sea to the regions around modern Cologne. This was not a kingdom with defined borders, but a zone of influence, expanding and contracting with the fortunes of war and weather. The Salian Franks occupied the coastal regions and river deltas, masters of a landscape where land and water merged in endless variation. Further south, the Ripuarian Franks controlled the Middle Rhine Valley, their territory encompassing both banks of the Great River, despite Roman claims to the contrary. The land itself shaped Frankish character in ways that would echo through centuries. In the north, the constant battle against the sea taught them patience and persistence. They built their settlements on artificial mounds, maintained extensive networks of drainage ditches, and learned to read the subtle signs that preceded the great floods. Every spring, when the Rhine swelled with alpine snowmelt, entire communities would work together to reinforce dikes and redirect waters. This collective effort, repeated generation after generation, created bonds stronger than iron and a pragmatic approach to governance that valued results over rhetoric. You stand on the Roman wall at Xanten, gazing east as a frontier guard in 350 AD. The sun sets behind you, painting the Rhine gold and red like a river of molten metal. Across the water, smoke rises from countless Frankish settlements hidden among the trees. You can smell the wood fires mixing with the damp river air and the leather oil from your own armor. Your grandfather told you stories of when this frontier was absolute, when no barbarian dared approach these walls without permission. Now, Frankish auxiliaries patrol beside you, speaking Latin with thick accents, their loyalties as fluid as the river below. Some nights, you hear them singing in their own tongue, songs that make your skin prickle with their strangeness. You know that many have families on both sides of the river, that the merchants who arrive each morning might be spies, that the boundary you guard grows more theoretical with each passing season. The empire still claims dominion here, but you wonder if the river has already chosen its own masters. The strategic importance of this region cannot be overstated. The Rhine served as the primary trade route between the Mediterranean world and the North Sea, between Britain and the continental interior. Whoever controlled the lower Rhine controlled the flow of British grain, Germanic amber, and Scandinavian furs into the empire. The Franks, positioned perfectly at this commercial crossroads, grew wealthy as intermediaries. Archaeological excavations have revealed Roman coins, Byzantine jewellery, and Saxon pottery in Frankish sites from this period, testament to their role as economic brokers between diverse cultures. The Great Migration, spears pointing west. The collapse began slowly. then all at once. Throughout the 4th century, the Roman grip on Gaul weakened finger by finger until, by 406 AD, it released entirely. That winter, the Rhine froze solid, and across its white expanse poured the Vandals, Alans, and Suebi in numbers that darkened the ice. The Roman response was not mighty legions, but desperate letters, not iron discipline, but scrambling retreat. Into this vacuum, the Franks advanced not as conquerors, but as the only force capable of maintaining order. Unlike other Germanic peoples who moved in great tribal migrations, the Franks expanded incrementally, settling each region thoroughly before advancing further. From their Rhine homeland, they first moved into Toxandria, the region between the Meuse and Scheldt rivers, around 358 AD. The Roman Emperor Julian formally recognized their presence there, transforming invasion into invitation through diplomatic sleight of hand. This pattern would repeat. Frankish warriors would occupy Roman territory, then receive official recognition as foederati, federated allies tasked with defending the very lands they had seized. By 430 AD, Frankish settlements dotted northern Gaul, like seeds scattered by an careful gardener. Each began the same way. A warband would claim territory, usually centered on a Roman villa or town. The warriors would distribute lands among themselves, while maintaining the existing agricultural system. Roman landowners who submitted kept portions of their estates. Those who resisted vanished from history. The Frankish elite occupied Roman villas, adapting rather than destroying the infrastructure of civilization. They maintained Roman irrigation systems, preserved Roman roads, and even continued collecting Roman taxes, though now for their own benefit. The archaeological record reveals this transformation in intimate detail. At sites like Krefeld Gelep, excavators have found Frankish warriors buried with Roman military belts, Germanic brooches, and Byzantine coins, their grave goods telling the story of cultural fusion. In former Roman towns, Frankish longhouses rose beside Roman stone buildings. New wooden halls for feasting and judgment appeared in Roman forums. The Latin language persisted for administration and trade, while Frankish dialects dominated in homes and fields. This was not the death of one civilization and its replacement by another, but rather a complex merger that would produce something unprecedented. The speed of Frankish expansion accelerated dramatically under their early kings. Childeric I, who died in 481 AD, controlled territory from the Somme to the Loire. His son Clovis would triple these holdings in a single generation. Yet this was not mindless conquest. The Franks showed remarkable strategic insight, consistently choosing expansion routes that followed Roman roads and river valleys, securing economic corridors before claiming surrounding territories. They understood that controlling trade routes mattered more than holding empty land, that a single bridge or ford could be worth a dozen villages. Cities of stone, villages of wood. The duality of Frankish civilization manifested most clearly in their settlements. In the same kingdom, sometimes in the same valley, stood Roman cities with their stone walls and orthogonal streets, alongside Frankish villages of timber and thatch following the organic curves of field and stream. This was not a simple division between conqueror and conquered, but a complex negotiation between different ways of living, different relationships with the land itself. Tournai, Paris, Cologne, Mainz. These Roman foundations became Frankish centres of power while maintaining their urban character. The Frankish kings understood the symbolic and practical value of cities. They established themselves in Roman palaces, held court in Roman basilicas, minted coins in Roman workshops, yet they transformed these spaces in subtle ways. The rigid Roman forum became a more fluid assembly ground. Public baths fell into disuse, while Christian churches rose from their stones. The amphitheatres, that once hosted gladiatorial games, now served as convenient quarries or fortifications. Meanwhile, across the countryside, a different world persisted. Frankish villages typically consisted of 3 to 12 wooden longhouses arranged around a central space. Each house sheltered an extended family, plus their livestock, the animals providing warmth in winter and immediate access to wealth on four legs. These settlements left lighter traces on the earth than Roman stones, post holes marking where timber frames stood, darker soil showing where hearths burned for generations, scattered pottery shards, and lost jewellery, telling of daily life. Yet these seemingly simple villages were sophisticated adaptations to local conditions, their locations chosen for access to water, arable land, pasture, and forest resources. You wake before dawn in a Frankish settlement near Orleans in the year 500 AD. Through the smoke hole in your roof, you can see stars fading as the eastern sky lightens. The air inside your longhouse is thick with the smell of animals, smoke, and humanity. Your cattle shift restlessly in their section of the building, separated from your family's living space by a wooden partition. As you rise from your straw pallet, your feet touch the packed earth floor, still warm from yesterday's fire. Outside, you hear your neighbour's rooster crow, dogs bark, and the first hammering from the smithy. Today is a court day, and you must travel to the old Roman town where the count dispenses justice. You dress in your best tunic, the one with Byzantine silk trim that cost you 3 cows, and strap on your sword. The 5-mile walk will take you from your timber world to one of stone, from Frankish custom to Roman law, from the familiar rhythms of agricultural life to the complex negotiations of power. This geographic diversity gave the Frankish kingdom its remarkable resilience. When plague struck cities, rural populations survived. When harvests failed in one region, others could provide support. The kingdom stretched from the cold shores of the North Sea to the warm valleys of Aquitaine, from the Atlantic coast to the forests of Thuringia. Each region contributed different resources: iron from the Ardennes, salt from coastal marshes, wine from former Roman vineyards, grain from the fertile plains of the Paris Basin. This economic diversity translated into political strength. The Franks also proved adept at managing environmental challenges. They maintained and extended Roman drainage systems in marshy areas, cleared forests for agriculture while preserving strategic woodland reserves, and developed sophisticated systems of crop rotation that improved on both Roman and Germanic practices. Their three-field system, which would later spread throughout medieval Europe, emerged from this synthesis of different agricultural traditions. By the early 6th century, the Frankish realm encompassed an extraordinary range of landscapes and peoples, from the misty islands of the Rhine delta to the sun-drenched hills of Provence, from Atlantic headlands to alpine foothills. The descendants of marsh dwellers had become masters of Western Europe's most diverse kingdom. This geographic breadth would provide the foundation for even greater ambitions as Frankish kings began to dream not merely of territorial expansion, but of imperial restoration. Part 3. Social structure and daily life. The hall of the warband. The heart of Frankish society beat strongest in the great hall, where smoke from the central hearth rose through rough-hewn rafters blackened by generations of feasting. Here, in these timber chambers that could hold 100 warriors, the essential relationships of Frankish life were forged and reaffirmed nightly through ritual, story, and the distribution of gold rings from lord to follower. The hall was simultaneously a home, court, temple, and theatre, where the bonds that held society together were performed and witnessed by all. The comitatus, the warband bound by sacred oaths, formed the fundamental political unit of early Frankish society. These were not mere military units, but brotherhood sanctified by ritual and sustained by success. A young warrior entering the comitatus underwent ceremonies that stripped away his previous identity and rebuilt him as part of something greater. He swore to die before his lord fled the field, to place his leader's honour above his own life, to share the shame of any defeat and the glory of every victory. In return, the lord swore to provide weapons, sustenance, and most importantly, opportunities for glory and wealth. The physical arrangement of the hall reflected and reinforced these relationships. The lord sat at the high seat, his back to the wall, facing the entrance where both friends and enemies must appear. His most trusted warriors sat closest, their proximity marking their status more clearly than any title. Down the long benches, men arranged themselves according to their victories, their reputation, their favour with the Lord. Every meal was a public demonstration of hierarchy, every gift a political statement, every seat a declaration of worth. These halls were furnished with surprising richness, contradicting Roman assumptions about barbarian poverty. Archaeological excavations have uncovered fragments of imported glass vessels, Byzantine silver plates, and elaborate weapons decorated with garnets from India. The walls displayed shields painted with geometric designs, spears ranked like organ pipes, and occasionally Roman standards taken in battle. Wolf pelts and bear skins covered benches, antlers from great hunts hung from rafters. Each object told a story, marking a victory, alliance, or successful raid. The evening feast followed patterns as rigid as any Roman ceremony. First came the formal boasts, where warriors recounted their deeds and announced their intentions for future glory. The Lord's poet, the scop, sang of ancestral heroes, weaving present company into the eternal fabric of tribal memory. Mead and imported wine flowed according to strict precedents, each warrior's horn filled in order of their standing. Food appeared in waves: roasted boar, beef, waterfowl, bread baked with precious wheat, cheeses, and honey cakes. The best portions went to proven warriors, public recognition of their value. Yet beneath this ceremony lurked constant tension. A perceived slight in seating arrangements could spark blood feuds lasting generations. Young warriors, eager for recognition, might challenge veterans to single combat between the tables. The distribution of treasure required delicate balance, too generous, and the Lord seemed weak, too stingy, and warriors might seek a more liberal patron. Every feast was simultaneously a celebration and negotiation, a demonstration of unity that could dissolve into violence with a single misplaced word. Laws written in blood and silver. The Lex Salica, the Salic law first codified around 500 AD under Clovis, reveals a society that calculated justice with the precision of merchants and the brutality of warriors. Every crime had its price in gold solidi, or silver denarii, a system called wergild that transformed vengeance into economics. The law specified compensation for everything from murder to stealing a hawk, from cutting off a thumb to insulting a woman's honour. This was not abstract justice, but practical peacekeeping, designed to prevent blood feuds from destroying the social fabric. The wergild for killing a free Frank was 200 solidi, enough gold to purchase 40 cattle or support a family for years. But the law revealed social complexities through its variations. Killing a Roman living under Frankish law cost only 100 solidi, while killing a Frank in the king's trust cost 600. A woman of childbearing age carried triple the wergild of a similar man, recognition of her reproductive value to the community. Boys under 12 were worth more than grown men, their potential valued above proven worth. These were not arbitrary distinctions, but careful calculations of social value, economic loss, and political necessity. You stand before the mallus, the public court, on a frost-covered morning in 520 AD. Your neighbour has accused you of stealing his prize, breeding sow, and now you must face judgment. The court meets in the open air, beneath an ancient oak that has witnessed justice for longer than memory. Around you stand the Rackenbergi, the law speakers, free men who carry the legal code in their memories, since few can read the Latin in which it was recently written. Your accuser speaks first, bringing oath helpers who swear to his honesty, though they witnessed nothing. You feel the cold iron of the ordeal blade heating in the fire nearby. If testimony fails to convince, you may need to grasp the glowing metal to prove your innocence, trusting that God will protect the truthful from burning. The crowd presses close, smelling of wet wool and morning ale. Some came for justice, others for entertainment. But all understand that what happens here maintains the fragile peace that keeps the community from devouring itself. The Frankish legal system blended Germanic custom with Roman procedure, in ways that would influence European law for a millennium. While Romans relied on written precedent and judicial interpretation, Franks emphasized community consensus and divine judgment. The ordeal by hot iron, boiling water, or cold water revealed God's verdict when human testimony failed. Trial by combat settled disputes between warriors, the assumption being that God would strengthen the righteous man's sword arm. These practices seemed barbaric to Roman observers, yet they served communities where written evidence was rare, and lying under oath risked not just perjury but damnation. Property law revealed a society in transition from communal to private ownership. Land could be inherited, sold, or gifted, but with restrictions unknown to Roman law. The famous Salic provision, excluding women from inheriting ancestral lands, would later prevent female succession to the French throne, sparking the 100 Years' War 9 centuries later. Yet women could own movable property, manage estates in their husband's absence, and conduct business independently. The law protected their morgengabe, the mourning gift received after the wedding night, as inviolate personal property that no husband could touch. Criminal procedure required public accusation and public judgment. Secret trials and private justice were forbidden. Every free man had the right to judgment by his peers, to bring oath helpers to testify to his character, to demand his accuser face him directly. The accused could choose exile over punishment, taking his chances in the wilderness rather than submit to judgment. These provisions, crude as they seemed to Roman jurists, contained seeds of due process that would flower in later centuries. The rhythm of seasons, a Frankish year. The Frankish calendar was written in mud and blood, harvest and warfare, the eternal cycle of agricultural labour, punctuated by seasonal violence. Spring brought both planting and raiding, summer meant growth and campaigning, autumn demanded harvest and final battles before winter forced all but the desperate to their hearths. This rhythm, as predictable as sunrise, shaped every aspect of daily existence from the highest noble to the lowest slave. March arrived with the Campus Martius, the assembly of armed free men that gave its name to the month. Warriors, who had spent winter repairing equipment and telling tales, now gathered to plan the year's campaigns. The roads, impassable with winter mud, began to dry. Horses, lean from winter fodder, started gaining strength on new grass. Smiths worked overtime, forging spear points and horseshoes. Women wove cloaks and packed provisions. By April, war bands departed, leaving behind the young, old, and enough men to guard against opportunistic neighbours. The agricultural majority experienced a different spring. As soon as ground thawed, ploughing began with the heavy wheeled ploughs that could turn the dense soils of northern Gaul. These were not the simple scratch ploughs of the Mediterranean, but massive devices requiring 8 oxen to pull, investments so significant that several families might share one. The 3-field system meant one field lay fallow, recovering fertility, while another grew winter wheat sown the previous autumn, and the third awaited spring planting, with oats, barley, or legumes. Every available hand worked from dawn to dusk, ploughing, sowing, repairing fences, clearing drainage ditches. Summer brought its own demands. While warriors sought glory in distant lands, those at home fought different battles. Weeds threatened to choke crops, wolves and bears, driven from forests by expanding settlement, raided livestock. The hay harvest in June required precise timing. Cut too early and it wouldn't dry, too late and it lost nutrition. July meant turning hay, watching weather anxiously for the rain that could ruin months of work. Children gathered berries, herbs and mushrooms from forest margins. Women tended vegetable gardens that provided crucial dietary variety. Cabbages, leeks, onions, peas, and herbs, both culinary and medicinal. The return of warriors in September coincided with the grain harvest, the year's most critical moment. Every hand, noble and common, joined the harvest. Lords who might lead a cavalry charge would swing a scythe beside their tenants, understanding that winter survival depended on these few crucial weeks. The grain was cut, bound into sheaves, dried in fields, then threshed on hard-packed earth with flails. Wind separated wheat from chaff. Precious grain-filled storage pits, lined with clay and covered with timber and earth, protected from moisture and rodents. October brought the slaughter month, when livestock that couldn't be fed through winter met their end. This was planned killing on a massive scale. Pigs, fattened on forest acorns, provided the majority of preserved meat. Cattle past their prime became salt, beef, and leather. The air filled with smoke from curing meat, the iron smell of blood, the sharp tang of salt. Nothing was wasted. Intestines became sausage casings, blood turned into puddings, bones were saved for soup and glue. Fat was rendered for cooking and lamp oil. Hides went to tanners, whose stinking workshops sat downwind of settlements. Winter transformed the Frankish world into isolated islands of warmth in an ocean of cold. From November to February, travel became nearly impossible. Communities turned inward. In the great halls, warriors spent long nights drinking, gaming, and listening to stories that preserved cultural memory. The Scop earned his keep now, reciting epic poems that might take weeks to complete. Craftsmen worked by firelight, carving bone, weaving cloth, forging tools. Women spun thread in an endless rhythm, their spindles never still during the dark months. Women of the hearth and crown. Frankish women navigated a complex world where their theoretical subordination coexisted with practical authority, where legal limitations met daily necessity, where the same woman might be property in law and power in practice. From the slave grinding grain before dawn to the queen negotiating treaties at midnight, women's lives revealed the gaps between Frankish ideals and realities, between what the laws proclaimed and what survival demanded. The morning began before sunrise in any Frankish household. The domina, the lady of the house, rose first, rekindling the banked fire that must never fully die. Her keys, worn on a chain at her waist, proclaimed her authority over storerooms, workshops, and treasuries. These keys were both practical tools and powerful symbols, formally transferred during wedding ceremonies to mark the bride's new dominion. To be given the keys meant receiving control over the household economy, and many women wielded this power with skill that would shame modern executives. The textile workshop, the gynaeceum, was exclusively female space, where free women and slaves worked side by side at looms and spindles. Here, young girls learned the complex patterns that marked regional and family identity. A skilled weaver was valuable beyond measure. The elaborate textiles she produced served as currency, diplomatic gifts, and markers of status. The discovery of tiny textile fragments in archaeological sites, some incorporating gold thread and silk imported from Byzantium, testifies to the sophistication of their craft. These workshops were also information exchanges, where women discussed marriages, alliances, and the gossip that often proved more accurate than official reports. You are a Frankish noble woman in 540 AD, standing in your hall while your husband is away campaigning. The morning sun streams through the smoke hole, illuminating dust motes that dance like tiny spirits. Your steward awaits your instructions about the harvest workers. Your youngest daughter clings to your skirts while you examine a piece of silver a merchant claims is pure. You can feel the eyes of your household upon you. Slaves, free servants, your husband's younger brothers who resent taking orders from a woman. You know that any sign of weakness will be exploited, any mistake remembered and retold. The weight of the keys at your waist reminds you that the survival of perhaps 60 souls depends on your decisions. You straighten your shoulders, deliver your judgments in a voice that brooks no argument, and privately wonder if your husband faces anything more challenging on his battlefield than what you confront in this hall. Marriage among the Franks was simultaneously sacrament, political alliance, and economic merger. The Morgengabe, the morning gift presented after consummation, became the wife's insurance policy against widowhood or divorce. Wise women invested these resources, lending money at interest, purchasing land, funding trading ventures. The persistence of Roman law in Frankish territories meant women could own property, make contracts, and represent themselves in court, rights their sisters in purely Germanic regions might lack. Queens wielded influence that transcended their formal positions. Clotilde, wife of Clovis, orchestrated her husband's conversion to Christianity, understanding that religious unity would strengthen political control. Brunhilde governed as regent for her young son, commanding armies and negotiating with emperors. Fredegund, rising from slave to queen, allegedly poisoned rivals and orchestrated assassinations with such skill that chroniclers, terrified and fascinated in equal measure, compared her to biblical Jezebel. These were not silent ornaments but active politicians whose decisions shaped kingdoms. The Christian Church offered alternative paths to power. Noble women who founded monasteries became abbesses, ruling territories larger than many counties. They controlled vast estates, commanded hundreds of dependents, corresponded with popes and kings. The convent provided education impossible to obtain elsewhere. Many abbesses were the most literate people in their regions, maintaining libraries and scriptoriums that preserved classical learning through the darkest centuries. Some women used religious vocation to escape unwanted marriages, others to pursue scholarship, still others to exercise authority impossible in secular life. Yet for every queen or abbess, thousands of ordinary women lived lives of relentless labour and limited options. Peasant women worked the fields beside men, their legal testimony worth half a man's oath, their worgil determined by reproductive potential rather than individual worth. Slave women faced sexual exploitation with no legal recourse, their children born into bondage regardless of their father's status. The laws that protected free women's honour, with severe penalties simultaneously, codified their subordination. The complexity of women's positions in Frankish society defied simple categorization. They were simultaneously protected and constrained, valued and subordinated, powerful and vulnerable. The same legal code that barred them from inheriting ancestral lands granted them control over household economies that constituted the real wealth of the realm. The religion that preached their spiritual equality enforced their earthly subordination. These contradictions would persist throughout Frankish history, creating spaces where exceptional women could achieve remarkable power, while ordinary women struggled within systems designed to limit them. Part 4. Spiritual Beliefs and Practices. Gods of Thunder, Saints of Stone. The old gods died slowly in Frankish lands, retreating from public squares to private hearts, from daylight ceremonies to midnight whispers, from royal halls to forest clearings, where ancient oaks still remembered the offerings of blood and gold. Even after Clovis knelt in the baptismal waters of Reims, after churches rose from Roman ruins, after bishops blessed Frankish swords, the thunder still belonged to Donar, the harvest still required Freya's blessing, and warriors still saw ravens as Wodan's messengers circling above battlefields. Christianity arrived in Frankish territories wearing Roman clothes, speaking Latin words, carrying Mediterranean assumptions about order and authority. It met a Germanic spirituality that located the sacred in nature rather than buildings, that valued personal relationships with deities over institutional mediation, that understood divine power as something to be negotiated rather than simply obeyed. The collision and fusion of these worldviews created a distinctive Frankish Christianity that would have seemed alien to both Pope Gregory in Rome and the pagan priests of Old Saxony. The material evidence of this religious transformation fills museum cases across Europe. Frankish graves from the 5th and 6th centuries reveal the confusion and hedging of a people unwilling to abandon any potential divine protection. Christian crosses lie beside Thor's hammers. Coins bearing Christ's image were pierced and worn as amulets alongside boar tusks, sacred to Freya. Warriors were buried with weapons for the afterlife. Despite Christian teaching about resurrection, women went to their graves wearing Byzantine crosses and ancestral amulets, their grave goods suggesting they expected to need both sewing needles and salvation in whatever came next. The Frankish sacred landscape was densely populated with powers both old and new. Every spring had its spirit, every crossroads its dangers, every forest grove its memories of sacrifice. Christian missionaries, rather than denying these powers, transformed them. The spring spirit became St. Brigid. The crossroads received a Christian shrine, the sacred grove was purified with holy water and rededicated to forest hermits, who seemed suspiciously similar to the druids they replaced. This was not cynical manipulation, but practical theology, recognizing that faith must grow from familiar soil. You walk through a Frankish forest in 525 AD, following a path worn by countless feet over centuries. Your grandmother brought you here as a child to leave bread and salt for the forest spirits. Now you carry your sick infant, desperate for any healing, Christian or pagan. The trees tower above you, their canopy so thick that noon feels like twilight. You smell wet earth and decomposing leaves, hear ravens calling in the distance, feel the weight of watching eyes that might be animals, spirits, or your own fear. Ahead, you see your destination, an ancient oak, massive beyond measure, its trunk carved with symbols old when Rome was young, but now a wooden cross is nailed to its bark, and at its base sits a Christian hermit, wild-haired and gentle-eyed. He takes your child, whispers prayers in Latin you don't understand, then ties a red thread around the baby's wrist, while muttering words that sound suspiciously like the old charms your grandmother knew. You leave an offering of bread and a Roman coin, uncertain whether you're paying the saint, the tree, or the old gods who surely still inhabit this place. As you walk home, your child's breathing seems easier, and you don't care which power deserves the credit. The Frankish nobility approached conversion with the practical calculation that characterized all their political decisions. Gods were judged by their effectiveness in battle, their ability to provide victory and prosperity. When Clovis allegedly promised to convert if Christ gave him victory over the Alemanni, he was conducting a divine job interview. The God of the Christians passed the test, but this didn't mean immediately abandoning all other options. Frankish lords might attend Mass on Sunday, sacrifice to household spirits on Monday, and consult fortune tellers on Tuesday, seeing no contradiction in covering all spiritual bases. Pagan practices persisted under Christian veneers for centuries. The Indiculus Superstitionum et Paganiarum, a list of condemned practices from the 8th century, reveals what still occurred 300 years after official conversion: offerings to trees, divination by bird flight, ceremonies at tombs, belief in werewolves, and celebrations of Thursday, Thor's Day, as sacred. Frankish Christians continued to name their children after pagan gods, swear oaths on divine weapons, and measure time by lunar cycles rather than the Christian calendar. The Church fought a long, slow battle against these practices, achieving success not through suppression but through substitution, offering Christian alternatives that fulfilled the same psychological and social needs. The baptism that changed the world. Christmas Day, 496 AD, in the Cathedral of Rheims, witnessed one of history's pivotal moments, disguised as a simple religious ceremony. Clovis, king of the Franks, stepped into the baptismal font as a pagan warlord and emerged as the Catholic champion of the West. Bishop Remigius, who performed the ceremony, supposedly told him to burn what you have worshipped and worship what you have burned. But both men knew this transformation was as much about power, piety. The political genius of Clovis's conversion becomes clear only when compared with his rivals' choices. The Visigothic kings of Spain and southern Gaul followed Arian Christianity, a doctrine that denied Christ's full divinity and marked them as heretics to the Catholic majority they ruled. The Burgundian kings also embraced Arianism, alienating the Gallo-Roman bishops who controlled much of the administrative apparatus. The pagan Saxons and Alemanni offered no common ground with Roman populations at all. By choosing Catholicism, Clovis aligned himself with the religious majority of Gaul, gaining crucial support from bishops who commanded not just spiritual authority, but economic resources, administrative expertise, and popular loyalty. The baptism ceremony itself was orchestrated for maximum political impact. Gregory of Tours, writing decades later, described miraculous elements clearly designed to establish divine approval: a dove descending with holy oil, supernatural light filling the cathedral, the sweet smell of paradise overwhelming the assembly. Whether these miracles occurred or were later embellishments, their political effect was real. 3,000 Frankish warriors allegedly followed their king into the baptismal waters, a mass conversion that transformed the religious landscape of northern Gaul in a single morning. Yet this conversion was neither complete nor immediate in its effects. Clovis himself continued practices that would horrify later medieval Christians. He murdered rival Frankish kings, including his own kinsmen, with cheerful brutality. He accumulated wives and concubines in patterns owing more to Germanic polygamy than Christian monogamy. His understanding of Christianity seemed to focus primarily on Christ as a war god, more powerful than Wodan, a divine patron who would ensure victory in exchange for worship. When he listened to the story of Christ's crucifixion, he allegedly exclaimed that if he had been there with his Franks, things would have gone differently, apparently missing the theological point entirely. The bishops who orchestrated this conversion understood its limitations but played a long game. They knew that bringing Frankish warriors into churches, however imperfect their understanding, would eventually transform them. Children raised with Christian stories, even mixed with pagan elements, would grow up with different assumptions than their parents. Christian queens would influence their households. Monastic schools would educate future nobles. The steady pressure of Christian culture would, over generations, accomplish what forced conversion could never achieve. The immediate political benefits were undeniable. Gallo-Roman aristocrats, who had viewed Germanic kings with deep suspicion, now saw Clovis as a potential protector of Catholic orthodoxy. Bishops opened city gates to Frankish armies, preferring Catholic barbarians to Arian heretics. The Eastern Emperor in Constantinople recognized Clovis as consul, acknowledging him as legitimate successor to Roman authority in Gaul. The Pope in Rome saw him as a potential sword against heretics and pagans. This web of legitimacy transformed Clovis from tribal warlord to Christian king, from barbarian conqueror to defender of the faith. Monasteries in the wilderness. Where Roman roads crumbled and cities shrank behind their walls, monasteries rose like lighthouses in a darkening world. These communities, part fortress, part farm, part school, and part hospital, became the vital organs of Frankish Christianity. They preserved not just faith, but literacy, not just prayers, but agricultural techniques, not just holiness, but the accumulated wisdom of antiquity that might otherwise have vanished forever. The Frankish approach to monasticism differed markedly from its Egyptian or Italian models. While Mediterranean monks sought isolation in deserts, Frankish monasteries engaged actively with surrounding communities. They cleared forests, drained marshes, and introduced new agricultural techniques. Their scriptoriums copied not just Bibles but medical texts, agricultural manuals, and classical literature. Their schools educated the sons of nobles who would govern kingdoms. Their hospitals treated peasants and princes alike. These were not retreats from the world, but attempts to perfect it. The foundation of Luxeuil, by the Irish monk Columbanus, around 590 AD, exemplified this distinctive monasticism. Built in the ruins of a Roman fort, surrounded by wolf-haunted forests, Luxeuil became, within decades, one of Europe's most influential religious centres. Columbanus brought Irish learning, including knowledge of Greek, largely forgotten on the continent, and an ascetic discipline that impressed even hardened Frankish warriors. His rule was harsh: minimal food, endless prayer, severe punishments for minor infractions. Yet nobles competed to send their sons there, understanding that Luxeuil produced not just monks, but future bishops, advisors, and administrators. You arrive at the gates of Marmoutier Monastery as a young noble in 560 AD, sent by your father to acquire the learning necessary for high position. The first thing that strikes you is the smell: incense from the church, mixing with the earthy scent of freshly turned soil from the monastery's extensive gardens. You hear the rhythmic chanting of psalms in Latin, a language you barely understand despite 3 years of tutoring. The porter who greets you has arms like a blacksmith from years of manual labour, challenging your assumptions about weak and effeminate clergy. Your tonsure, the ritual shaving that marks your entry into religious life, feels like a military initiation. You're assigned a cell barely large enough to lie down in, a straw mattress, and a schedule that begins at 2 a.m. with matins prayers. The food is simple but plentiful. Bread, vegetables, occasional fish, and watered wine. Your days divide between prayer, study, and labor. You learn to copy manuscripts, your fingers cramping around the quill, your back aching from hunching over parchment. You dig ditches, tend beehives, and harvest grain beside the sons of counts and kings. Slowly, you begin to understand that this is not punishment but preparation, that the discipline that seems harsh is forging you into something stronger than your warrior brothers who remained in your father's hall. Monasteries served as crucial economic centers, pioneering agricultural innovations that would feed Europe's expansion. They developed the three-field system, introduced new crops, improved livestock breeding, and maintained seed banks that preserved genetic diversity. Their watermills ground grain for entire regions. Their workshops produced everything from illuminated manuscripts to iron plowshares. They managed vast estates with an efficiency that secular lords envied and often imitated. The wealth they accumulated funded churches, bridges, and hospitals, creating infrastructure that kingdoms couldn't afford. The intellectual preservation, accomplished by Frankish monasteries, cannot be overstated. While much classical learning was indeed lost, what survived did so primarily through monastic copying. Scribes who might rather have been warriors spent decades transcribing Virgil, Cicero, and Aristotle. They developed new scripts, including Carolingian minuscule, that made reading easier and faster. They created libraries that attracted scholars from across Europe. They maintained correspondence networks that connected Ireland to Italy, Spain to Saxony, creating an international republic of letters that transcended political boundaries. Female monasteries played equally crucial roles, though history often overlooks them. Frankish noblewomen who became abbesses commanded resources comparable to duchies. The monastery of Chelles, founded by Queen Balthild, became a centre of learning where nuns copied manuscripts, composed music, and created textiles of extraordinary beauty. These convents offered women opportunities for education and authority unavailable in secular life. They also served as retirement homes for queens, refuges for widows, and schools for noble daughters. The tension between monastic ideals and political reality created constant challenges. Monasteries needed royal protection, but feared royal control. They preached poverty while accumulating vast wealth. They sought spiritual perfection while engaging in political machinations. Many abbots were younger sons of noble families who treated religious positions as inherited property. Yet despite these contradictions, or perhaps because of them, monasteries remain the most stable and productive institutions in Frankish society, bridges between the classical past and medieval future, between earthly power and heavenly aspirations. Part 5. Conflicts and Interactions. The Axe and the Eagle. Wars with Rome. The relationship between Frank and Roman was never simple conquest or submission, but rather a centuries-long dance of violence and alliance, raid and recruitment, mutual contempt, and grudging admiration. From their first recorded clash in 256 AD, when Frankish raiders penetrated as far as Tarragona in Spain, to their final absorption of Western Roman authority in 486 AD. The Franks served simultaneously as Rome's destroyers and inheritors, its barbarian enemies, and its last defenders in the north. The pattern established itself early. Frankish warbands would cross the Rhine when Roman attention was elsewhere, raiding for portable wealth rather than territorial conquest. They struck like summer thunderstorms, sudden, violent, and gone before proper resistance could organize. Roman writers described their terror at Frankish tactics, warriors who swam rivers in full armor, who threw their Francisca axes with deadly accuracy before closing for hand-to-hand combat, who seemed to feel neither fear nor mercy. Yet these same Romans hired Frankish auxiliaries by the thousands, valuing their ferocity when directed at Rome's enemies. The Emperor Julian's campaign of 358 AD revealed the complexity of Romano-Frankish relations. He defeated the Salian Franks at Toxandria, but then, rather than expelling them, confirmed their right to settle there as foederati. This pragmatic decision recognized reality. Rome lacked the strength to hold the frontier by force alone. Better to transform raiders into guardians, to make the wolves into sheepdogs. The Franks, for their part, discovered that Roman military service offered regular pay, valuable training, and pathways to power unimaginable in their homeland hierarchies. By the 4th century's end, Franks had penetrated the highest levels of Roman military command. Arbogast, a Frank, became Magister Militum, commander of all Western armies, and effective ruler behind puppet emperors. Ricimer commanded Roman forces against other Franks, while maintaining close ties to his tribal kinsmen. These men navigated between worlds, wearing Roman uniforms while maintaining Frankish customs, speaking Latin in council and Germanic in their households, serving Rome while preparing for its end. You stand in the ranks at Chalons in 451 AD, your Francisca, heavy at your belt, your spear point glinting in the summer Sunday. The smell of thousands of unwashed warriors fills your nostrils, mixed with horse sweat and the iron tang of sharpened weapons. You are a Frank, but today you fight for Rome against Attila's Huns. To your left stand Visigothic cavalry, who were your enemies last season. To your right, Roman legionaries maintain their ancient formations, though you notice their equipment is increasingly similar to your own. Across the field, you can see the Hun formations, their mounted archers like a dark cloud on the horizon. Your commander is Aetius, the last great Roman general, though his mother was Germanic and half his strategies are Frankish. As the armies clash, you realize you're not defending Rome, but rather the idea of Rome, a concept that will survive the empire itself. Your axe splits Hun shields. Your war cry echoes across the battlefield, and in this moment, barbarian and Roman become meaningless distinctions. There is only survival and victory. The collapse of Roman authority transformed Frankish-Roman warfare into something resembling hostile takeover rather than conquest. The Frankish king Childeric I fought both for and against Rome in the 462 AD, allied with the Roman general Aegidius against Visigothic expansion one year, raiding Roman territories the next. His tomb at Tournai, discovered in 1653, contained both Frankish weapons and Roman military insignia, Byzantine coins, and Germanic jewellery, embodying in death the dual nature of his life. The final act came in 486 AD, when Childeric's son Clovis defeated Syagrius, the self-styled King of the Romans, at Soissons. Syagrius was no true Roman emperor, but rather a warlord, maintaining Roman pretensions with Germanic military methods. His defeat marked not the fall of Rome to barbarians, but the transformation of Roman authority into something new. Clovis took not just Syagrius's territory, but his administrative apparatus, his tax systems, his legal frameworks. The Franks conquered Rome by becoming Rome, preserving what was useful, discarding what was not. Blood feuds and brother wars. The greatest enemies of the Franks were always other Franks. No external threat, not Huns, nor Saracens, nor Vikings, spilled as much Frankish blood as the succession disputes that erupted whenever a king died. The Merovingian practice of dividing kingdoms among all legitimate sons, and sometimes illegitimate ones, guaranteed that brothers would become rivals, that uncles would murder nephews, that kingdoms would fracture and reunite in patterns of violence as predictable as they were destructive. The roots of this fratricidal tendency lay in Frankish concepts of kingship and property. A kingdom was not a sacred trust or abstract state, but personal property, no different from a sword or horse, to be divided among heirs. Each son received a portion of the realm, complete with its own capital, treasury, and army. These divisions ignored economic logic, strategic necessity, and often geographical sense. Cities might be split between brothers, trade routes severed by new borders, defensive lines made indefensible. The result was inevitable: conflict as each heir sought to reunite what division had broken. The 6th century witnessed the most spectacular of these struggles. In the 40-year war between Brunhilde of Austrasia and Fredegund of Neustria, a conflict that began as rivalry between queens and escalated into genocidal warfare between kingdoms. Both women were foreigners who had married into Merovingian power. Both were accused of witchcraft and murder. Both commanded armies with skill that shamed their male relatives. Their war consumed 2 generations, depopulated entire regions, and ended only when Brunhilde, then nearly 80, was tied to wild horses and torn apart, her death as savage as the conflict she had sustained. These internal wars followed patterns as ritualized as they were brutal. First came the grievance, real or manufactured, an unequal inheritance, a murdered relative, an insulted honor. Then the gathering of supporters, each lord calculating which claimant offered better prospects for plunder and advancement. Warfare itself was seasonal, beginning after spring planting and ending before autumn harvest, unless hatred burned hot enough to override economic necessity. Battles were rare, sieges and raids more common. The goal was not usually annihilation but submission, not death but acknowledgement of superiority. The role of the Frankish nobility in these conflicts revealed the kingdom's fundamental weakness. Great lords maintained their own military households, controlled their own fortified centres, and pursued their own foreign policies. They shifted allegiances based on advantage, supporting whichever Merovingian claimant offered the most generous terms. Some, like the Pippinids, who would become the Carolingians, used royal weakness to build their own power bases, serving as mayors of the palace, while real kings became increasingly irrelevant. The Church attempted to moderate these conflicts through the peace and truce of God movements, declaring certain days and seasons off-limits for warfare, threatening excommunication for those who violated sanctuary or harmed non-combatants. These efforts achieved limited success. Warriors who would tremble at the threat of damnation still found ways to justify their violence. A blood feud was a matter of honor that superseded religious obligation. A rightful inheritance was worth any sin to secure. The same bishops who preached peace often commanded their own military forces, defending church lands with decidedly unchristian enthusiasm. The Hammer and the Crescent. October 732 AD, between Tours and Poitiers, the fate of Western Christendom balanced on the edge of Frankish swords. The Umayyad governor of Al-Andalus, Abd al-Rahman, led an army of Arabs and Berbers north from Spain, having already conquered Aquitaine and burned churches from Bordeaux to Tours. Facing them stood Charles, mayor of the Palace of Austrasia, soon to be known as Martel, the Hammer, leading a force of Frankish infantry whose disciplined shield wall would earn them comparison to a sea that cannot be moved. The Battle of Tours, or Poitiers as the Arabs called it, has been mythologized beyond recognition, transformed from a frontier skirmish into the salvation of Christian Europe. Yet its real significance lay not in stopping some imagined Islamic conquest of all Europe, but in demonstrating that Frankish military evolution had produced forces capable of defeating the seemingly invincible Muslim armies that had conquered from India to the silent Atlantic. The Franks had studied their enemies, learning from decades of Byzantine Arab warfare, adapting their tactics to counter mobile cavalry with disciplined infantry. You stand in Charles Martel's battle line as dawn breaks over the field near Tours. Your mail coat, heavier than your grandfather's, weighs on your shoulders like responsibility itself. The October morning is cold enough that your breath fogs, merging with the mist rising from the nearby river. You've been standing in formation since before first light, your rectangular shield locked with those of your companions, your spear point one of thousands, creating a lethal hedge. Below, you can see the enemy camp stirring, their silk banners beginning to flutter in the morning breeze. You smell wine on the breath of the man beside you, fear sweat from behind, the oil on your own blade. Then you hear them, the takbir, Allahu Akbar, rising from thousands of throats as the Umayyad cavalry begins to move. The ground trembles under their hooves. Their arrows begin to fall like deadly rain. "Hold!" Charles shouts. "Let them break upon us like water on stone." The man beside you takes an arrow through the throat, gurgling as he falls, but you step closer to your other neighbour, closing the gap. The cavalry strikes your line with the sound of thunder, men and horses screaming, spears splintering, swords ringing on shields. But you hold. The Frankish line bends, but does not break, and slowly, impossibly, the tide of horsemen begins to recede. The victory at Tours made Charles Martel the most powerful man in Francia, though he never claimed the royal title. His success came not from superior numbers or divine intervention, but from military reforms that transformed Frankish warfare. He created the first truly professional Frankish army, warriors who trained year-round rather than seasonally. He adopted the stirrup, recently arrived from the east, which transformed cavalry from mobile infantry into shock troops. He began the practice of granting land to warriors in exchange for military service, laying the foundation for the feudal system that would define medieval Europe. The aftermath of Tours revealed the pragmatic nature of Frankish-Muslim relations. While chroniclers described a war of religions, the reality involved complex alliances that crossed faith lines. Frankish lords in Aquitaine sometimes allied with Muslim governors against other Franks. Muslim and Christian merchants continued trading across the Pyrenees. The Carolingians even corresponded with the Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad, finding common cause against the Umayyads of Spain. The frontier between Christendom and Islam in the 8th century was not an iron curtain, but a permeable membrane through which goods, ideas, and occasionally armies passed. Charles Martel's sons and grandsons would continue his campaigns against Muslim forces in southern Francia, but these were wars of territorial expansion rather than religious crusade. They seized Narbonne and pushed Muslim forces back across the Pyrenees, but they also fought fellow Christians with equal enthusiasm. The idea of unified Christian warfare against Islam would not truly emerge for another 3 centuries. In the 8th century, faith was just one factor among many in the complex calculations of war and peace. The crown of Charlemagne. The transformation of the Frankish kingdom into an empire began not with grand declarations, but with methodical conquest, as Charlemagne, Charles the Great, spent 30 years of almost continuous warfare, expanding Frankish power from the Atlantic to the Carpathians. Each campaign was planned with meticulous detail, supplied with unprecedented resources, and executed with a combination of military might and political sophistication that had not been seen in the West since Rome's height. The Saxon Wars, lasting from 772 to 804 AD, revealed both Charlemagne's determination and his capacity for brutality. The Saxons, still pagan and fiercely independent, represented everything the Christian Frankish kingdom opposed. Charlemagne invaded Saxony repeatedly, each time believing he had achieved submission, each time facing renewed rebellion. His solution was genocide disguised as conversion. At Verdun in 782 AD, he ordered the execution of 4,500 Saxon prisoners in a single day, a massacre that shocked even his own supporters. He deported thousands of Saxons to other parts of his realm, replacing them with Frankish settlers. He made rejection of Christianity punishable by death, forcing conversion at sword point. Yet Charlemagne was more than just a conqueror. His campaign against the Lombards in 773 AD showed sophisticated strategic thinking. Rather than assault Lombard fortifications directly, he sent part of his army through the Alps by an unexpected route, forcing the Lombard king to abandon his defensive positions. His Spanish campaign of 778 AD, though ultimately unsuccessful and immortalized in the Song of Roland, demonstrated his ambition to be seen as Christianity's champion. His systematic conquest of the Avar Khaganate in the 792s brought vast wealth to the Frankish kingdom, treasure accumulated over centuries of raiding that funded Charlemagne's cultural and architectural programs. The imperial coronation on Christmas Day, 800 AD, in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, was both culmination and transformation. Pope Leo III rescued by Charlemagne from his Roman enemies, placed a crown on the Frankish king's head and proclaimed him Emperor of the Romans. Einhard, Charlemagne's biographer, claimed the king was surprised and would not have entered the church had he known the Pope's intention. This was almost certainly propaganda. The coronation was carefully orchestrated, political theatre designed to legitimize Charlemagne's power while asserting his independence from Byzantine claims to Roman succession. The mechanics of governing Charlemagne's vast realm required innovations that would shape European governance for centuries. He established the missi dominici, pairs of inspectors, one clerical, one secular, who travelled throughout the realm, ensuring that local counts administered justice fairly and collected taxes honestly. He standardized weights, measures, and coinage across his territories. He issued capitularies, legislative acts that combined Germanic custom with Roman law and Christian morality. He created a palace school that attracted scholars from across Europe, making his court at Aachen a centre of learning that preserved classical knowledge and created new synthesis of Christian and pagan wisdom. Military reforms under Charlemagne transformed the Frankish army into the most formidable force in Europe. He required all free men to provide military service proportional to their wealth. Those with 4 manses of land had to serve as heavy cavalry, equipped with horse, lance, sword, and mailcoat. Lesser landholders served as infantry or supporting troops. He established supply depots along major routes, allowing armies to campaign further from home for longer periods. He coordinated multiple armies, operating simultaneously, a logistical achievement unmatched since Rome's legions. The Carolingian Empire, at Charlemagne's death in 814 AD, encompassed modern France, Germany, the Low Countries, Switzerland, most of Italy, and parts of Spain and Central Europe. It was the largest political unit in Western Europe since the fall of Rome, and its influence extended far beyond its borders. The Byzantine emperor recognized Charlemagne as Emperor of the West. The Abbasid Caliph sent him an elephant as a gift. English and Spanish kings sought his alliance. Even the distant Danes and Slavs acknowledged his power. Yet this empire contained the seeds of its own dissolution. It was held together primarily by Charlemagne's personality and military success. Its administration, though sophisticated by medieval standards, could not effectively govern such vast territories without modern communication. Its economy remained fundamentally agricultural, lacking the commercial complexity that had sustained Rome. Most critically, Frankish inheritance customs, demanding division among heirs, guaranteed that the empire would fragment after Charlemagne's death. The crown that Pope Leo placed on Charlemagne's head would become the most contested symbol in European history, claimed by German kings and French monarchs, sought by Italian princes and Spanish rulers, its legacy echoing through centuries of European conflict. Part 6. Decline, Diaspora, and Transformation. The breaking of the realm. The empire that Charlemagne had forged with iron and faith shattered like glass, dropped on stone, not from external blow, but from internal fracture. His son Louis the Pious spent his entire reign watching his own sons circle him like wolves, each demanding their portion of inheritance while their father still breathed. When Louis died in 840 AD, the remnants of imperial unity died with him. For 3 years, brothers made war upon brothers, Christian blood-soaked fields from Aquitaine to Bavaria, and the dream of restored Rome revealed itself as exactly that, a dream too grand for Frankish custom to sustain. The meeting at Verdun in August 843 AD was less negotiation than autopsy, 3 brothers dividing their grandfather's corpse with the precision of butchers. Lothair, the eldest, received the imperial title and the Middle Kingdom, a bizarre strip of territory running from the North Sea to Rome, including the Low Countries, Lorraine, Burgundy, and northern Italy. Louis the German took the eastern portions, the Germanic lands beyond the Rhine, where Frankish settlement was thinnest, but silver mines were richest. Charles the Bald claimed the Western Kingdom, the heartland of ancient Gaul that would become France. The division made no economic sense, split natural geographic units, and separated communities that had been united for generations. Yet it would prove permanent in ways its architects never imagined, establishing the basic political geography of Western Europe that persists today. The Strasbourg Oaths of 842 AD, sworn by Louis and Charles against Lothair, revealed how deeply division had already penetrated. Each brother swore in the language his allies' troops could understand. Louis in Romance, the emerging French language, Charles in Germanic. Their armies could no longer comprehend each other's speech, though their grandfathers had spoken the same Frankish tongue. Language itself was fracturing along with political unity, creating barriers that would grow higher with each passing generation. You are a Frankish count in 843 AD, standing in the Great Hall at Verdun as the kingdom tears itself apart. The August heat makes the crowded room stifling, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and bitter argument. You fought beside men from all three kingdoms, shed blood with warriors who are now declared foreigners to each other. Your own lands are split by the new borders. Your western estates fall under Charles, while your eastern holdings belong to Louis. The trade routes you've protected for decades are severed by new customs barriers. Your eldest son serves Lothair in Italy, while your younger son holds land from Charles. You listen as scribes read the treaty terms in Latin that fewer and fewer nobles understand. Watch as brothers who should be allies glare at each other with naked hatred. Tomorrow, you must choose which king to follow, knowing that this choice will determine not just your fortune, but your family's fate for generations. The wine tastes of ash, the bread of sand. You remember Charlemagne's coronation, the glory of united Christendom, and wonder if this division is God's punishment for Frankish pride. The immediate consequences of partition were catastrophic. Administrative systems designed for a unified empire collapsed when divided. The missi dominici could no longer travel freely across kingdom boundaries. Coinage, standardized by Charlemagne, began to diverge as each kingdom minted its own varieties. The palace school at Aachen, deprived of imperial patronage, dispersed its scholars across Europe. The careful balance of power that had kept regional nobles in check disappeared, allowing local strongmen to assert increasing independence. Lotharingia, Lothair's middle kingdom, proved especially vulnerable, stretched impossibly thin, lacking natural frontiers, pulled between western and eastern neighbours. It became the battleground of Europe. Within a generation, it had fragmented further into competing duchies and counties. The struggle for this middle territory, rich in trade routes and symbolic significance, would fuel European warfare for 1,000 years. The very name Lorraine, corrupted from Lotharingia, still evokes centuries of contested sovereignty. The psychological impact of division cut even deeper than its political effects. The Frankish elite had defined themselves as heirs to Rome, bearers of a universal Christian mission. Now they were merely regional kings, squabbling over diminishing resources. The imperial title, retained by Lothair's line, became increasingly meaningless as its holders controlled ever smaller territories. By 888 AD, when the last legitimate Carolingian emperor died, the title had become so devalued that multiple claimants could declare themselves emperor with equal implausibility. Vikings at the gates, Magyars in the fields. The weakness born of division invited catastrophe from every direction. In 841 AD, dragon-prowed ships appeared at the mouth of the Seine. By 845 AD, Vikings had sacked Paris. Within a generation, Norse raiders treated Frankish rivers like highways, penetrating deeper into the continent than any previous invader. From the east came the Magyars, horse nomads whose arrows darkened skies and whose speed made mockery of Frankish heavy cavalry. From the south, Saracen pirates established bases in southern Francia, raiding as far north as the Alps. The empire that had seemed invincible under Charlemagne could barely defend its own heartland under his quarrelling grandsons. The Viking assault on the Frankish realm followed patterns terrifyingly different from traditional warfare. These were not armies seeking territorial conquest, but raiders pursuing portable wealth. They struck monasteries first, knowing that these centers of prayer were also repositories of gold, silver, and precious manuscripts. The monastery of St. Martin at Tours paid £20,000 of silver to avoid destruction. Reims paid £5,000. Paris paid whatever the Vikings demanded, again and again, the city becoming a recurring source of income for Norse raiders who returned like clockwork to collect their tribute. The Frankish military system, designed for set-piece battles and seasonal campaigns, proved wholly inadequate against enemies, who appeared without warning and vanished before response could organize. Vikings used shallow draft vessels that could navigate rivers impassable to Frankish forces. They established fortified camps on river islands, using the very waterways that had enriched Francia as invasion routes into its heart. They struck during harvest season, when militia forces were dispersed in fields. They coordinated multiple raids to prevent concentrated defence. They exploited political divisions, allying with one Frankish faction against another. The siege of Paris, from 885 to 886 AD, demonstrated both Frankish resilience and systemic failure. Count Odo defended the city heroically for months, his forces holding 2 fortified bridges that prevented Viking passage further upriver. Yet Emperor Charles the Fat, when he finally arrived with a relief army, chose to pay the Vikings £700 of silver and grant them permission to raid Burgundy rather than fight. This craven decision destroyed the last vestiges of Carolingian legitimacy. Warriors who had held Paris through starvation and assault watched their emperor reward their enemies. Odo would later become king of West Francia, his legitimacy earned through courage while hereditary rulers cowered. From the east, Magyar horsemen brought different but equally devastating tactics. They moved faster than any force the Franks could field, their composite bows outranging Frankish weapons, their hit-and-run tactics, making traditional battle impossible. They raided not for settlement, but for slaves and plunder, depopulating entire regions. The Frankish response was paralysis. Heavy cavalry, the dominant military force since Charles Martel, could not catch light horsemen. Fortified cities offered protection, but could not prevent countryside devastation. Each kingdom blamed others for inadequate defence, while none could mount effective resistance. You crouch behind the wooden palisade of a hastily fortified church in 920 AD, somewhere in what was once prosperous Lorraine. The morning mist carries the smell of smoke from burning villages, the sweet sick scent of unburied dead. Your hands shake as you grip your grandfather's sword, a blade that once served Charlemagne himself. Through gaps in the fortification, you can see Magyar outriders circling like wolves, their recurved bows ready, waiting for someone to expose themselves. Inside the church, women and children pray in whispers, terrified that loud voices might draw attention. Your lord is dead, shot through with arrows in yesterday's failed sortie. The king, if he even knows of your plight, is hundreds of miles away fighting his own brothers. You have perhaps 40 men capable of fighting, local farmers mostly, against hundreds of the finest horse warriors in the world. As the sun rises higher, burning off the mist, you see the main Magyar force approaching, their captured slaves stumbling in chains, your own neighbours among them. You know that by nightfall, you will likely join them or lie dead among the ruins of everything your ancestors built. The empire that once made the world tremble now cannot protect a single church. The response to these invasions was not imperial restoration, but radical decentralization. Local strongmen built private fortifications without royal permission. They assembled personal military forces bound by oath to them alone. They negotiated separate peaces with invaders, paying tribute from their own territories to spare their own lands. This process, later termed feudalization, transformed the Frankish realm from a kingdom into a patchwork of semi-independent lordships. Every castle that rose for defence became a centre of local power that challenged royal authority. Every warrior who swore personal allegiance to a local lord, rather than distant king, weakened central government further. The church, which had been the great unifying force of the Carolingian Empire, fragmented along with secular authority. Bishops became territorial princes, more concerned with defending their lands than saving souls. Monasteries built walls and hired soldiers. The Peace of God movement, attempting to limit warfare through religious sanction, revealed its own weakness by the very need to exist. When spiritual authorities must beg temporal powers to stop killing peasants and burning churches, the social order has already collapsed. By the year 1000 AD, the transformation was complete. The Frankish Empire had become France and Germany, distinct nations with separate languages, cultures, and destinies. The Vikings had settled in Normandy, becoming French-speaking vassals who would conquer England. The Magyars had established Hungary, converting to Christianity, and joining the European order they had once terrorized. Local castellans wielded power that Charlemagne would have executed them for presuming. The very concept of public authority, of kingship as service to the realm, rather than private property, had largely vanished. From the ashes of Charlemagne's empire rose the feudal order that would define the European Middle Ages. Echoes in stone and parchment. We began with a paradox. The barbarians who brought down Rome would become more Roman than the Romans themselves. Now, having traced the Frankish journey from marsh dwellers to empire builders, we see that this transformation was both more complex and more complete than that simple formulation suggests. The Franks did not merely adopt Roman ways, they created something entirely new from the fusion of Germanic custom, Roman law, and Christian faith. They preserved classical learning while transforming it, maintained imperial structures while adapting them to different needs, claimed Roman authority, while exercising it in distinctly un-Roman ways. In becoming Romans, they reinvented what being Roman meant, and in the process, they invented Europe itself. The physical traces of Frankish civilization surround us still, though we rarely recognize them as such. The cathedral at Aachen, where Charlemagne lies entombed, stands as a monument to Frankish ambition, its octagonal design, copying Byzantine models, while its execution speaks to Germanic craftsmanship. Across Europe, thousands of place names whisper Frankish origins. Every town ending in court or ville, every forest called bois, every field named champ carries their linguistic DNA. The very script in which Latin was preserved through the Dark Ages, Carolingian minuscule, was a Frankish invention, its clear letters eventually evolving into the typefaces we read today. When we write a lowercase a or g, we use forms developed in Frankish scriptoriums 12 centuries ago. More profound than physical remnants are the cultural and political concepts the Franks bequeathed to posterity. The idea that legitimate kingship requires religious sanction, formalized when Pope Leo crowned Charlemagne, would shape European politics for a millennium. The notion that free men should participate in governance through assemblies and oaths, inherited from Germanic tradition and formalized in Frankish law, planted seeds that would eventually flower into parliamentary democracy. The synthesis of warrior culture with Christian ethics, creating the ideal of chivalry, emerged from Frankish attempts to reconcile their violent heritage with their adopted faith. Even the fundamental political geography of Europe, with France and Germany as distinct but related nations, stems directly from the Treaty of Verdun's division of the Frankish realm. The French language itself stands as perhaps the most eloquent testament to Frankish transformation. It bears a Germanic name, France, derived from the Franks, yet it is a Romance language, evolved from the Latin that Frankish conquerors adopted from their Gallo-Roman subjects. French contains hundreds of Frankish loanwords, particularly terms related to war, governance, and emotion, the areas where the conquerors most deeply marked their subjects. When a French speaker says guerre for war, maréchal for marshal, or orgueil for pride, they use words that Frankish warriors brought from Germanic forests to Roman cities. This linguistic fusion mirrors the broader cultural synthesis, neither purely Germanic nor purely Roman, but something new, something that could only have emerged from the unique historical moment when the Frankish axe met the Roman eagle and chose to nest rather than destroy. It's been my privilege to walk with you through the corridors of history, from those misty marshlands where the first Frankish warriors gathered to the golden halls, where their descendants claimed the imperial purple. We've stood in the basilica, where Clovis accepted baptism, witnessed the crown placed on Charlemagne's head, and watched an empire divide like a cell splitting, each part carrying the genetic material to become its own organism. May the whispers of history lull you into deep, restorative sleep.